For this occasion, the event is organised in cooperation with Uitgeverij De Geus, and the lectures are sponsored by NCDO. And tonight it's Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein, she's the author of the book that made globalization less uncontested. No Logo was the book, and the world came to know what a sweatshop is. No Logo became the gospel for globalization critics, and now she wrote another book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. 4 years she carried out an impressive amount of journalistic research. She travelled to most of the countries she describes, and she wrote a tremendous book. It has a staggering amount of historic facts, and then, as a gold digger, Klein has collected wonderful quotes. And then the book is beautifully written, and again, Naomi Klein proves that her timing is better than Charlie Chaplin's. Okay, it's high time now to give her the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi Klein.
For bringing me here in Amsterdam. I'm thrilled to be here. It's true, I did have a modest goal for this book, which was to challenge the official story of how neoliberal economics, or what the French call savage capitalism, this vision of the world that believes that the market should dominate every aspect of life, how this ideology swept the world. Not every part of the world has been swept equally. Your country has been one of the notable holdouts, so is mine, to some extent, although none of us are immune. But when Milton Friedman died last year, I was still working on the book, and he died at age 94. And it was an occasion in many of the large newspapers of the world, or in all the large newspapers of the world, to retell the official version of history through the lens of this one man. And what we heard was sort of best encapsulated in a headline in the Wall Street Journal, a tribute to Milton Friedman. Freedom man. I also have a quote from John Williamson, the man who created the Washington Consensus and came up with that term, talking about the possibility of stoking up a pseudo-crisis, a hyperinflation crisis in Brazil, so that they could reap the beneficial effects of reform. So when you hear that this book is a conspiracy theory, I want you to know it is a conspiracy theory with endnotes, a lot of endnotes. Because in these technocratic gatherings, there is a level of honesty about the difficulty of implementing these precise policies during peaceful times. So the thesis for the book began for me when I went to Iraq in the first year of the invasion, and I saw this intersection between 3 different kinds of shock. And I wrote about it at the time for a magazine in the US called Harper's. I wrote a piece called Baghdad Year Zero, Pillaging Iraq in Pursuit of a Neocon Utopia. I was in Iraq at a really key moment when the first siege of Fallujah began after the Blackwater Guards were strung up on the bridge in Fallujah. And also I was there when the second front was opened up in the Shia South against Muqtada al-Sadr. So I was there at this turning point. And the analysis that I came home with was about the intersection between the shock of the war, the shock and awe military campaign that was designed to deepen disorientation. And if you read the Shock and Awe manual produced by a U.S. military college, it's very clear about the fact that what makes this strategy different is that it's not targeting military targets. It's targeting, this is a quote, the public writ large. And the strategy in Iraq, we now understand from people like Richard Armitage, who was the Deputy Secretary of State during the war under Colin Powell. What Richard Armitage said the strategy was that Iraqis were supposed to be, and these are his words, they were supposed to be so shocked by both the war and the collapse of Baathism that they would be easily marshaled from point A to point B. He's very honest about it. And his analysis is they didn't use enough shock. They weren't shocked enough. He said compared to the Germans and the Japanese after World War II, the Iraqis weren't shocked enough. Friedman understood that just as prisoners are softened up for interrogation by the shock of their capture, massive disasters could serve to soften us up for his radical free market crusade. He advised politicians that immediately after a crisis, they should push through all the painful policies at once before people could regain their footing. He called this method economic shock treatment. I call it the shock doctrine. Take a second look at the iconic events of our era, and behind many, you will find its logic at work. This is the secret history of the free market. It wasn't born in freedom and democracy. It was born in shock. One other thing I've learned from my study of states of shock. Shock wears off. It is by definition a temporary state. And the best way to stay oriented, to resist shock, is to know what is happening to you and why. Tradition that is that you don't have to choose. You have to what you have to have is high standards. You have to be rigorous, and you have to tell the truth. But that there is, a wonderful tradition of writers, filmmakers, artists identifying with movements and really kind of putting themselves at the service of those movements without being propagandists or pamphleteers. And I think that the line is when you misrepresent facts, when you lie, it's pretty straightforward for me. That's the line.
But don't you ever experience a tension between these two identities?
I don't really, honestly, because I actually think lying is